Hi, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be showing some advanced formatting tricks for Affinity Publisher version 2. Stick around. This feature I want to talk about now came out with version 2. I'll direct you to the left side of the screen. You will see a whole list of prologue, chapter, and then bonus at the end. Before we dive into what this all means, I'll just forewarn you, this was a prototype that I set up just to experiment and see if the feature behaved the same way as it did in Adobe InDesign, and if I could still do the scaling that I mentioned in the previous video where you format for one page size and you can automatically scale to the next. So let's go over what this is and what the effect of that scaling means. So this is a new feature called Books. That's what this little word here is, if you can see it, if your resolution is high enough. And all of these here are individual projects. So you create and you save a project and treat it like a chapter. And the goal of this type of formatting, now you could do this in multiple different ways, and I'll talk about that in a second. The goal of this type of format is to use a book to combine multiple individual projects into a single published work, which you then export the whole thing as a single PDF. You can choose to do that with all of your chapters in one group, in one project, and then a front matter project and then a back matter project, or you could break things up into tiny little piecemeal things. This depends on what you want your approach to be and where you want your burden to shift. What do I mean by burden? You've probably noticed by now, if you have experimented with the techniques taught in my first video, that when you add content or you change the size of the font or anything else, that it shifts your pages around. It can make your work longer or shorter, which means your chapters are getting longer or shorter. And if you are trying to keep that chapter heading on the right side page, that can become a problem and can cascade and ripple through your work and cause all sorts of problems, especially if you've gone through the effort of placing images with the image placement feature, which is grayed out here, that place tool that's highlighted. If you're using that tool to drag graphics in the middle of your chapter, or the start of your chapter, and you're doing it for scene breaks, God forbid, then anytime you shift your content by changing the size of the font or your margin or whatever, all of those images are now out of place because they don't lock to the content that they're next to. They attach to the physical page record that you attach them to. So if you drag an image onto page 12, and then you change your formatting and the words that were on page 12 are now on page 14, the graphic is still attached to page 12, and you have to go hunt it down, find it, click it, and drag it back to page 14 so that it sits inside the paragraphs or around the chapter start that you wanted it to be near. It can get tedious really fast. You can get away with around some of that with some other techniques, but none of it's perfect, and it gets problematic to play with the format of your book and adjust the font size and add new pages, and your readers come back and say, hey, can you add a pronunciation guide or a table of contents or whatever. If you're going and adding content at the start of your book or changing the format of your book overall, your content shifts and it becomes a problem. Well, the chapter breakdown and treating each chapter like its own project is a way to get around that, because you can't shift this chapter out of position. You can't shift the graphics that are attached to the first page out of position. Now I'm going to show you this, but one of the images is completely out of whack because I reorganized my folder structure and it's having trouble finding the image. I know that from my previous experiment. Ignore that. That's an experiment. That would not stay in the published version. But the little bird here, he becomes super tiny for no reason at all. So I can go into, but you can see I double clicked on Legacy and it opened. If I go over to Pages, now I can see it because it was hidden behind everything else. And see what he did? This is the funkiness you can expect from some images. But now you'll get to see how I add images to chapter headings, because I'm going to go and find him, hunt him down. That should be under here, because C. Mallory was the artist that I shared this folder with who created the Raven image. and I will go and find the Raven PNG, click to drop him on the page, and then I think he was about right there. I'm judging, I'm looking at the first page here. You can kind of see it rendering, and I know that I want that claw to be near the chapter 1. I can't see it perfectly from here. This takes tweaking, and I'm not going to spend time getting this perfect in this video because this isn't the purpose of this video. This is just here to be an example. But let's just say that that's where I wanted the bird, and then I come in and boom, he's on that page. And anything else that I go to and say is a apply master and tell him he's chapter start. Okay. Then the bird appears. I go back, apply master. No, I was wrong. I want him to be content. And he disappears. So you see how I can apply that chapter style, the chapter heading style, to any page by applying a different master. You do want, by the way, when you're getting your content imported, you want them all to start off with your default master content because of the page flow that you've set up between these guys and how all of that works. You don't want to interrupt that. And it gets a little weird when you're jumping between masters, even though they still have the same text boxes on them. Just trust me, set up your whole chapter or your whole book. If you're doing a book as a group, as one project, and then all the extraneous front matter and back matter as separate projects, that's fine too. But do them this way, where you set it all up as master content, and you go to any page that should be a chapter start, right click, apply master, and say what it need to be. Now, so that's how you get the graphics in, and this is why doing it in this book fashion doesn't, it softens the blow when you are adding content or when you are changing the size of your formatting and, you know, increasing a font size or decreasing a font size or shifting your margins because your publisher or your printer told you that your margins were too tight or whatever other reason there is. This actually helps that because it makes it easier to adjust without dramatic ripple effect across your content. The trade-off is that if I want to scale this 6:9, that's what this is, into a 5 1/4 by 8 for my paperback, the format that I use for paperback, then I have to resize legacy first, and then departure, and then passage, etc., etc., etc. I can do the same techniques that we did before. It's in a different menu location, so I would go to document and document setup, and I can get to the scaling and the margins and all of that here, and the dimensions for the page, just like I did in the previous video. But it only affects this one project that I'm doing it to. So you have to keep that in mind. If I want to scale a version of this between paperback and hardcover, if they are different print sizes, the best course of action is to make sure that first, all of these projects are saved in one folder that's named after the format. So a 6:9 folder or what have you, and then copy the folder to duplicate it, so copy and paste, or right-click, duplicate, whatever your system does. Rename the next one to your new file type, your new print size, 5.25 by 8 or 4 by 6 or what have you. And then inside that, open that book up, that book file, and then go and point him to, or create a new one, add all of the projects, and then resize each one by one by one by one by one. That will get you to the same end result. It's a little bit of extra work on the resize part, but that's also the least frequent thing that you do. The most frequent thing that you do is going to be, oh, I missed content, or oh, that printed too small, I didn't like it, or oops, I've got to adjust my margins. That kind of stuff is far more common, and it's easy enough to repeat when needed across different projects. That's the other thing, is when you're adjusting margins, yes, that is project by project. Now, what about styles? I've got all these projects. What if I change my paragraph style? Or in this case, this one, it's called paragraph. So if I change that paragraph style, I do it in legacy first. And the reason is, that is my chapter 1, and I set that as my style master. So this is my style source for everything else, which means if I adjust styles in legacy, I can come down here to the next chapter, departure, right click and synchronize. Now, the reason I say to do that one by one and not use the big button down here at the bottom, because A, that sometimes doesn't work for me and I don't know why, and I don't care because I use a different approach on purpose. I right click and I synchronize this one, and then I open this one and manually inspect and make sure everything still lines up the way I wanted it to. To me, that is critical. The other thing to keep in mind is page numbering. This will control and keep constrained the numbering between your chapters. It does that through this little menu here. That's the little hamburger menu, the top right of the book's listing. If you click that with the chapter highlighted, you can go to page numbering options, page number options, and say continue from previous chapter. Then once that's set, you can click the hamburger with them highlighted and say update numbers, page numbers, or you can click the update numbers button down here. So if I go to legacy and I adjust it to add pages, or it just gets longer due to formatting changes, let's say it jumps from 1 to 26 up to a page count of 1 to 30, then I can go here, click on departure, update numbers, and boom, he'll start at 31 and he'll go from there. So it will self-adjust. Now, when it does that, it's making changes to departure. So I do recommend then opening that file and inspecting and then manually saving to make sure that departure gets saved with what you changed. Otherwise, it could get hung in an open state and you don't want that. So there's where the extra tedium comes in, but in trade-off for that, you get a lot more flexibility with the ability to add, remove, move, reposition content in a lot more or a lot less destructive way. Okay, so I'm back now after a short break. For those that aren't aware, I vape for anxiety. I make my own e-juice. This is no THC or any of that. If that bothers you, I'm sorry. This clearly isn't going to be the video for you. This is going to be a long video, so I'm probably going to vape now and then and enjoy a beverage. So, with that in mind, we're now looking at a freshly blanked out Affinity Publisher. I am going to open a project that I've been toying around with and playing with off screen because I wanted to prototype the new format that I'm going to use for the stealth edition release of my novel Siscci. I'm not going to show cover art because that's not solidified yet. I will have an artwork series of videos coming out pretty soon, which is going to be designed to feature Affinity Photo 2, which is another piece of software you get if you buy the whole Affinity suite. I use that for cover art. I use that for interior art. And you're about to see why I love it so much because of the interior art I was able to produce for this project. So I started with the prologue and prototyped the design of that so that I could use it as a template to launch the rest of my chapters and get the content into them. Where do you see this? So file, open, formatting. Pardon my exhaustive formatting here. Stealth 4.6, and then boom. Here we are. I am going to start with the master. I know you see this here. I'm going to get there in a second. I want to start with master pages and talk about that first. You've seen in the previous video, if you watched it, my setup of all of my styles. They're relatively the same, except I've renamed content to be paragraph because the naming doesn't matter. And for some reason, when I set this up, I was just different that day. So otherwise, they are mostly the same with just some tweaks to color and everything else. I will show some of the special cases here in a minute. For master, always start with what the bulk of your book is going to be. And in this case, that is your body content or master, content, content master, whatever you want to name it. But this is what the vast majority of your book is going to be templated as. So on this, I've got headers, and I've got footers. I do a split footer on the left facing page because I do a timestamp for that page, which I manually enter and update per page after all of my formatting is complete. And I go and I look at my source material to make sure, which has in Scrivener, has all the date timestamps in the metadata for each scene. So I psychoanalyze it all and get it in there. But that's why it just says timestamp for now. And then there's body content in the center that flows into one another, right? This holds the majority of my content. But that's not the only master you're going to need. You're also going to need one for your prologue if you do a prologue, or your epilogue, or your foreword, anything that is readable content that is outside of your body content. Because you're going to want your headers to show up, and you're going to want, if you got special formatting like a timestamp, you'll want that to show up, but you don't necessarily want page numbers, because the appropriate page numbering for a prologue or an epilogue is I, IV, right? It's a little lowercase Roman numerals. Your reader doesn't need to see that. That's for you to keep track of when you're formatting, but it's not necessarily for the benefit of your readers. You want to denote through page numbering, subconscious denotation, that the page you're looking at is not part of the main body of the book. It is something extra. It is an extra prologue, or it's an extra epilogue. So I leave those off on those pages. In addition to that, you are probably going to want a front matter / back matter master. So this I just called outer matter, master, outer matter. This is what I will use for title pages, copyright pages, dedications, things like that. Those also don't need headers. They don't need page numbers. Keep those clean and crisp, and you can fill the whole space if you want. For now, this is the format I'm going to stick with, and I may indeed come in here and stretch this to the actual margins. I haven't decided yet. But for now, that's what this is. And then we come to the fun stuff. So I'll pause here to talk about a few things that are going on. Now, one, this is a document with bleed. It's a 0.125 inch bleed. This is by design. I'm going to start with this. I may have to increase the bleed to get the desired effect when it hits the printer, but for now, I'm running with a fairly industry standard 0.125 inch bleed. What bleed is, for those of you that don't know, is this tan line is the margin of the page. That's the edge of the page. This is where you expect your printer to cut the paper when they're printing, because they're always printed on a larger sheet and cut down to size. With bleed, you're extending the artwork past the page cut line, a prescribed amount, 0.125 inches in all directions, so that when the page is cut, that you can ensure that graphic goes to the edge of the page. So this extra blue line on the outside is my bleed line, and you'll notice that all of my graphics go to the bleed line. Now, you might also notice that this is a textured false leather background that I'm using behind my pages, and that's going to come into play when you see the bright yellow fonts on the left side. We'll get into that in a second, but these are just graphical images that I created and I pasted here with this placement tool. So if I click on the edge, you'll see that that is an image. I'll move it, boom, 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 boom. It's an image. There's the white paper. Here's this guy. And then I'll just undo him back into place. Pretty neat, right? And then we get this graphic over here is over top of the leather on that side. So I've got leather on this side, literally a reversed or horizontally flipped image for the next side. You can do that in most programs. Find an image you like as a background if you're going to do this, and then you can tell it to flip horizontal, and you put one on the right, one on the left, boom, and they will line up with each other, and they are pixel located, so they will just spread across. And if you manage to crack your spine enough to open the whole page, it looks like one solid piece of leather. I think that's awesome. So then I place this here. This is my chapter start. And then, as I've explained before, I like my chapter starts to always begin on the right side page when I've got the book open. And that means that in some cases, when chapter content isn't long enough to hit that last odd number page or even number page, that you end up with a dangling blank page by design. And that dangling blank page is called master end, and it will get a graphic. So in reality, when you've got the book open and you've got a dangling last page, a blank page, you'll see this sketch version of the Siscci creature and this painting version of the Siscci creature looking at basically side by side in your face with the next chapter starting right there on screen. So you can set all of that up with place image and getting them positioned properly, lining them up with the center line where your pages fold into each other, extending them to the bleed. You can get all of this done yourself. I will do a video when I get my first author proof to show how it turned out so that you can see how this works in practice, not just in theory. Because this is my first foray into this, although I have done some research and this does appear to be the way. I'll know for sure once I'm holding it. Pretend I'm from Missouri. So from there, let's step into the actual formatting itself. So this is what I'm calling a stealth edition. All of the pages are dark with brighter font, kind of the reverse of what you normally see with a white or a cream page and black font. And it's a full color print. So this will be full color blasted in your face every time you reach a chapter start. This chapter happens to end on an even numbered page. Otherwise you would see the Siscci sketch here. So this is my template. This is what I'm going to spawn everything else off of. And it has all of the styles and everything the way I like. The paragraph font, for example, and by the way, this is a 4:6 print, so it's very small. So the fonts tend to be very small. I could probably make them smaller and still get away from it, but I'm trying not to force my readers to pick up a magnifying glass. But let's look at paragraph, because most of my styles, as you saw in the last video, spawn off of paragraph. If I edit paragraph, there's a couple sections that people typically skip because you usually don't need to use them. And if you're not doing a full color print, they don't matter anyways. And that is color decorations. Text fill is normally turned off, or it's got that line through it. That means no change. So that means if it's that white box with the red line, that Affinity Publisher isn't specifying a font color. It's going to default to black. I've given it a color, which may change based on my author proofs and everything else. This may get adjusted, but for now, this is what I've set it to, and this is where you set it, in the color and decorations thing. Now, there is another thing going on here that I wanted to point out, and you see these lines, these horizontal lines? Those are coming through meticulously organized decorations on fonts. So if I go to, I scroll down for no reason. If I go to chapter number, the prologue, in normal chapters, that'll say chapter 1, chapter 2, etc. And I go down, you'll see the color and decoration is sort of a slight gray because I wanted it to be distinguished. And because it's over top of the graphic for Siscci, I go to decoration and you'll see that I've got decorations enabled. I've got a bottom line identified only. Otherwise, these would be dark gray also. And then I set everything to column, baseline, and you can adjust these numbers to get that line drawing exactly where you want. Then you can give it a color. It's that simple. So this is how you play with that to get boxes around your text, or lines under, or lines over, or whatever you want to do. This is the way you can do that fairly easy. It's just a little bit tedious because in this case, Threads of Night is drawing this line and Prologue is drawing this line, and I need them to be pixel perfect lined up with each other and create a gap for the T to grow between the two. Yeah, you kind of get where I'm going. I'm anal retentive and OCD. I'm going to spend the time to do this. You don't have to. This is just information I'm sharing in case this is something you're interested in doing. So with that said, I am going to go into the mostly silent section of this effort, and you're going to see a lot of screens pop up. I may occasionally slow the video back down to normal time and talk to you, but for the most part, just expect to be seeing me moving pretty quick and going through my formatting process. So I hope you enjoy, and I hope this is informative for you. So now I've got all of my chapter shells created off of my prologue, which was this guy here, but I've got an actual prologue file now. So that means I am now ready to go in and start manipulating each chapter file to have the right section name, that have the right body content, and changing the chapter headings, and the chapter timestamps will come last, but I will get there. Quick note, what you've been seeing me do here, if you're still watching, is when I paste this stuff in, since I intentionally reduced it to one page because I didn't want any page flow errors, which can happen, this turns red to say there's content beyond the edge of the page. And you just hold shift and click this arrow and it will autofill and create new pages to hold your content. Just so that you know what I was doing there, because I forgot to mention it in this video, even though I did mention it in the other one. And then I am quickly applying master to turn everything to master content because they don't need to all look like a chapter start. That's when you see the headers appear. I can then right click on this, edit section, make sure it's chapter 4, blah, blah, blah. And then here I edit that content to also say that. Then I'm quickly highlighting all of the content in that chapter. Now, I could have made this a little simpler for myself by taking that 4x6 AFPub file that I created, that I told you I was using as a template. I could have removed the content from it and made it a little easier, made it so I didn't have to delete content before I could paste in. But I didn't think of that, so now I'm paying the consequences, and that's okay. That is perfectly fine. All right, so this is going to be paragraph. And then I scroll back up, and I'm going to work with this and delete pages at the end like I've been doing. I think I've mostly been doing that, but anyways. I then quickly scroll through, and I'm like, all right, this is chapter first. Scroll. I don't like that it recenters my page, but what can you do? I'm sure there's a tweak for that, but I don't care enough to find it. VVV, and then apply my scene break style, which I believe is like wingdings or something, and it turns it into those characters. And then scene start, scroll, scroll, scroll. Look for another one. All of it is on this page. VVV, enter. For that moves, set that to the first paragraph of scene break. And now it's on the same page instead of a new page. VVV, enter. First scene break. I didn't do the keystrokes this time because I knew I'd be recording and I didn't want any funky key combinations to accidentally pause my video recording, because I've had that happen and it sucks. So I'm just using clicks, plus then you can follow my mouse and see what I'm doing if you can keep up with the sped up video. But since I started talking in this one, I will just talk through this one, and then you can see kind of what I'm doing in real time. All right, so we end on an even number page, which we want. So I don't get to add a page, and I don't get the fun chapter end scene with the or graphic with the sketch. There we are. I'll verify on this page. Chapter 4 amelioration is coming through in the header, which means this one is now ready for prime time. Well, it's ready for me to do the rest of them and then come back and add all of the timestamps across the entire thing, which is going to take a long time. So, yay, really looking forward to that. Fun fact, before I continue further, is because I'm increasing or decreasing the page size and decreasing the font, I can't do it to the same ratio as the original publish. The original publish was a paperback at 5.25 by 8, and while it was a smallish font for industry standards, it was still a bigger font than this, and it came to 110 pages. And part of that is I used the thinnest margin the publisher would let me get away with, so all of the words are very close to the edge of the page. I did leave a fairly generous gutter margin, which means that you didn't have to crack the spine to read the inner text, but everything else is pushed as far to the edge as possible with tiny font and not a lot of line spacing, so I crammed as many words as I could per page. Still, you can clearly see that is still happening here, but not as dramatically as it was before, which means that this is taking up more pages for the content than it did in the original publish. To give an example of what that means is the prologue in the original was around 16 pages. It was just under 16, or it ended on the 16th page. And in this one, it's around 22 or 20. So content did grow because of formatting changes. And that means that this is going to be a thicker book than the original, which is fine. It just means it's going to cost more to print. On top of the fact I'm doing a full color duplex print, which means it's going to be the most expensive variation. Fun times. And now back to hyperspeed. I want to check something because I'm second guessing my spelling of desperation. If you're an author, you can relate. I've seen the word so much lately that I'm like, did I spell it wrong? Nope, I got it right. All right. Sorry, that was my Scrivener project. Desperation, enter. Okay, back to hyperspeed. saw something concerning in the prologue text that was here to be deleted. So rather than second guessing myself, I'm going to go double check that and make sure that it doesn't have funkiness going on in the formatting. It looked like there was like a chapter title text in the middle of, there we go. See, that shouldn't be there. That should be paragraph. Actually, that should be seen first. Good catch, keen eye while scrolling. I scroll to the end, and now my content is off page. Go here. Nope, it's not off page. How did that fit? All right, I'm going to do something then. I'm going to do that. Shift here. Why didn't he show up? Oh, fun. Just not showing. There we go. Why did he show on that page? Pages. That's bizarre. So take this page and delete, and what happens? There he is. Now we right click on this page. See, this is some of the weirdness that still happens, and I'm sure it's just a minor bug that they'll fix eventually. Page after, just one, okay. Get him there, right click, apply master, boom. Okay. So now Prologue will hopefully be fixed and not have that problem anymore. Just quick glance back through. And yes, this is a named prologue because originally this prologue was a short story that I published on my website while writing my debut novel, Bathed in the Blood of Ravens. Fun. I just thought it fit this story so well. And I knew this story followed the events of that prologue, or that short story. So I figured, why not make the short story the prologue? So, but it's still considered optional reading, as all good prologues should be. So save, close. All right, we're back to normal. Now delete these. Or you know what? Before I resume, I want to show you, because this might not work. I'm gonna do this. I've been avoiding this because I have been burned in the past doing this, but sometimes when you paste content in to a bunch of existing pages, sometimes it doesn't span properly or flow properly across the pages, but it looks like it might have, so I might be able to skip doing the page delete, recreate, and all that, and speed this process up. Looks like all of these actually have content, and it ends there. Turn that into paragraph. It'll get shorter. This is a short chapter. And there we go. He only has 2 scene breaks. So let's get to it. All right. So I just figured out how to speed up my process. Okay, so if you didn't notice, what happened in that chapter, because it was a little bit long, when I pasted the content in without deleting the pages first, it first created empty pages where it would have or should have put the content by, shift, click to, auto flow. That messed up the first time because it was coming from pre-existing pages I had pasted into. Real fun times. Honestly, I think the bug exists when you are pasting from a left side page or telling it to autoflow from a left side page and telling it to scale to the right and then create extra pages. For some reason, the first time, probably 50, 60, 70% of the time, it creates blank pages and does not insert the text. And you click it again and it finally creates them and inserts the text. And you end up with this weird blank gap in there. And then I went back and tried to highlight the text and turn it all into paragraph style, and it missed like 2 paragraphs at the end, and I had to catch that. And then, yeah, always pay attention. So I think for the rest of these, I'm going to go back to what I was doing at first because I didn't have any errors, and that is I'm going to delete the content, delete the pages, insert the content from the new chapter, and then tell it to autoflow to add the empty pages and fill them with content. That has not steered me wrong since or yet. So I'm going to go back to that. Sorry if you see me doing that. That's blowing the moth off my second monitor. Come on, man. Author's got enough to go through without all that. Interesting. Okay. And this is a very tiny closing vinyl chapter of the story. Not many pages at all. That is fine. Fly master, content, key. Grab it all. I mean it. Turn you into paragraph. Oh, seriously, why didn't you go paragraph? That was weird. Did you see that funky highlighting? I saw that funky highlighting. All right, and then we take this and delete it. We have a 2-page chapter because that is how the book ends. Come back here. Save. Close that. We'll go back to book. Okay, no more fast forwarding now. So all I've got in this right now is prologue, chapters 1 through 12, which is the entire content of the book. You can see that the chapters themselves went to 154 pages, and the prologue goes to 22. So that total takes me up to 176 pages from an original 110-page book. This is your kind of revelation, if you weren't already aware, that shrinking a book down, even if you shrink the font, if you try and keep it readable, it's probably going to increase in page count. 5.25 by 8, shifting to 6 by 9 and back and forth. That's a relatively easy shift, especially if you go to about 11 or 11.5 in your hardcover, since most people expect those to be larger fonts. That's still relatively doable to keep them at the same page count and keep them just as readable, because the font difference isn't that dramatic, even though if you hold them side by side, it's noticeable, but it's not so dramatic that it becomes unreadable. The target audience for this book is people that just really want the small form factor, the extra content, and all of that. I will eventually be doing a hardcover version of this, so this will eventually scale to 6 by 9, and I did all of my graphics at 6 by 9 and shrunk them to 4 by 6 when I placed them. Another bug. Shrunk them to 4 by 6 when I placed them into this content. So all of my graphics are 300 dpi, dots per inch. That is important. The higher that resolution, the better they come out when they're printed on a page. So I do 300 dpi, and I always do them slightly larger than I need for my small sizes. Basically, as large or larger than I need them for my biggest possible publishing format. That way, when I scale them down, I don't lose any clarity. That's important. And then I'm never taking a small image and trying to scale it up and making it blurry to make it fit a 6 by 9. You don't want to do that either. So from here, I can save the book. So I've got the book saved. I've got all the chapters saved. All of the content is synchronized style-wise, and all of the numbers are accurate. 1 to 22, 23 to 34, 35 to 48, etc. So let's do this. And export. So notice I clicked on the hamburger menu to export, because that's how you export a book. So we're going to say area is, I'm not doing PNG, I am doing PDF. PDF for print is fine. Raster DPI is at 300 because we want that. We want to make sure that we are doing all chapters as pages. I believe that is the correct setting. We're about to find out. It's kind of in the last video, if you were paying attention and you watched it, I had that one faux pas where I exported as PDF, but the default setting when you export a single project as PDF is all spreads, and all spreads is the side-by-side pages. It turns them into like a JPEG and then smashes them together into a PDF. That doesn't print, not as a book. So you never want to use that. I don't know what industry uses that export, but it certainly ain't publishing novels. So, and why is it showing that one as the preview? That's really, really weird. So let's see what's going on here. Embedded fonts. Make sure you always do all fonts, subset fonts. That way it includes everything you used. I'm looking to see if there's anything about bleed. Downsample images above 375. I don't use any of that. Everything I use is 300 dpi. This is compressing to 300 dpi. Make sure the quality is 100%, not 98, not 99, not 80. Always. I'm not using an ICC profile. Compatibility. We want to do, I believe it's X1. Overprint black. Include bleed right there. I want to make sure, since I'm formatting with bleed, I have to make sure to include the bleed in the export for Ingram Spark. If you were exporting this to go to Amazon, you would not check this box. You would set up your document to have bleed, but you would not include bleed in your PDF settings. I don't know why they do it that way. It's totally not industry standard to do it that way, but that's how Amazon does it. So it is calculating and doing things. I want to make sure this hits at 100%. So I don't have any funky errors. I don't know why that is the default picture that it chose, considering that's the last possible chapter in the stack, but okay. Let's try exporting. Stealth 4x6. We will do this. That's a fine name for a PDF. Let it export. It's kind of ticking away. You can see things flashing top right now and then this is calculating. This is a vape break if I ever heard of one. Just killed a gnat. All right. I don't know if it's going to automatically pop it up. It doesn't look like it. Stealth 4x6. We have this PDF. All right. Starts with the prologue and goes through. You can see how the pages shift left, right, left, right, left, right. That's what we wanted. Let's make sure that the background imagery did indeed come through, and it did. There's the ending content. There's the left side page. Now notice this is weird because that goes into the binding. So when you're setting these up, there's not a good way to get that to overlap and print inside the binding, but I'm fine with that being black and then this coming in there. There's some weird artifacts because of the images and the fact that this is viewing in my browser. But because I don't have Adobe products installed. Sorry, I'm jaded when it comes to Adobe. So I may end up switching this font to a lighter yellow or to a gray or something like that. I think I'm going to get probably my wife in here to give an in-person opinion. Now, clearly this is going to look different on the paper, and that's why I'm keeping it a little brighter. Because I'm expecting it to dim slightly when it's printed on paper. But then again, it's a full color print, so we will see. I do like that transition. I can't wait to see that side-by-side printed. That's going to be sick. But so from here, what is next? So I've seen a prototype export from my project, my book project. So what's next? Well, clearly this is missing some front matter content. It's missing title pages. It's missing table. I don't do a table of contents, but it's missing front title page, some art pages that I want to add, the copyright page, dedication, and any pages that I want to add for calls to action. There's also going to be a title page. There's a splash page that's supposed to go by normal publishing standards. There's a splash page that would go between the prologue and the first chapter to tell the reader, now the book's starting, because that's where the real content begins. So, not that the prologue's not real content, but prologues are considered optional reading, and you should write them as such. Never write a prologue a reader has to read in order to understand your book. You're doing it wrong. But I don't give a lot of writing advice. That is one thing I'm a stickler on. That's one of very few. Other than that, my other stickler thing is write for the story, not for the format, not for what somebody told you. Write what is important to the story. All right, so I need to add front matter. I need to add back matter. Back matter will include things like pronunciation guides, and so actually I usually put that in the front these days. But it will include things like that. And a call to action page to join my newsletter, to make sure you post reviews, and then a splash page or two for my other published novels to encourage readers to go to those with QR codes so they can just scan and be taken on their device to that content online. So pro tips for you, if you are just getting into this, make sure you're including that kind of content. But it looks to me like that's going to bump my my book up to, I'm guessing, probably around 180 pages total. So hooray, from 110 to 180, because I shrunk it, and fonts don't perfectly scale between those formats. All right, so editing Rick here, days later. I did not like the outro I originally filmed, so here we go. I will have more formatting videos for this novel coming soon. I will have a video when I receive my author proof coming soon. I will have additional videos for doing some of the editing on the graphics and the images for the interior of the book, and possibly some for the cover. I recorded those, but I don't think they came out correctly. I have some additional videos coming up over the next month or so, talking about just the publishing industry as a whole. And I also have a Kickstarter starting soon, so expect a video on that, and hopefully you'll participate. Make sure that you like and subscribe. Make sure that you're sharing this with other authors that could learn from this process, especially if they could learn from this software. And let's spread this knowledge across the community so that we can take on just, that one more job for our publishing process, and, continue to do it all. For those of us that don't have a massive support system or an infinite bank account. So hope to see you around. Welcome to my channel. See you soon.